The LG G5 from last year wasn't a bad phone, but it didn't sell well, most likely because its modular design did not appeal to potential customers. That's probably why the much refined LG G6 skips on modules entirely, instead bringing improvements that even non-geeks would appreciate. But there's a few good reasons why the G5 is still worth your attention. I don't think that design is one of them. Both phones are roughly of the same size, but the G6 looks more evolved with its glass and metal construction. It fits a much larger screen and bigger battery within the same footprint. There is no camera hump on the back, and it is water resistant. On the other hand, the G5 has the clickier power button, and there is one less piece of glass that could potentially break. About that modular design of the G5, there is hardly a selling point right now. Only 2 modules were ever launched. One of them, a hi-fi module for supposedly better sound, never made it to the US. The other was a camera grip with extended battery, but you can still take great photos without its help. As I mentioned, the G6 fits a noticeably larger display within the same physical size, which means that it is still easy to operate with one hand, despite the 5.7-inch diagonal size of its display. LG achieved this by using a screen with different proportions, one with an 18:9 aspect ratio, while the G5 uses a more traditional 16:9 display. In other words, the screen on the G6 is taller and slightly more narrow. But while displays like the G6's could be the future of smartphones, the screen on the G5 is still relevant and will be for years to come. Most online videos are optimized for these proportions, and so is most Android software. Apps do run fine on the G6, but some games might need some manual adjustment to fit properly on its display. On the technical side of things, both displays have very high pixel density, so content looks nice and sharp. But the G6 is brighter and supports HDR video, which looks quite impressive when you see it. With the G6, you also get a blue light filter that makes the screen put less strain on your eyes and mind at night. And yes, the always-on display is still here, but the digits are now larger, which makes them a bit easier to see. When it comes to software, the LG G6 and the G5 have a lot in common. Both run Android 7.0, meaning that both support features like split-screen multitasking, muting notifications, and the Google Assistant. Both also contain a lot of tweaks introduced by LG, such as the omission of the app drawer, although you can bring it back from the settings menu. Both let you edit the on-screen buttons, which is something that I really like. Both let you adjust the size and layout of the on-screen keyboard, which is also nice. Of course, the LG G6 feels more refined from a user interface perspective. It has a number of unique features and tweaks and feels better suited for side-by-side multitasking. But as a whole, I wouldn't say that the difference between the two phones is a striking one. And speaking of similarities, the LG G6 doesn't bring any major hardware changes under the hood. It uses a Snapdragon 821 system chip, which is only slightly faster and more optimized than the Snapdragon 820 used in the LG G5. Also, both phones have 4GB of RAM and 32GB of storage, expandable with a micro SD card. Hardly a surprise, real-world performance is at the same level. Both phones are more or less equally fast when it comes to everyday tasks, and only some heavier games might run at better frame rates on the G6. About the cameras, it is still funny how they look like something startled them, but let us focus on their properties now. Both setups are comprised of 2 cameras, one regular and one wide-angle camera for fitting more in the frame without having to step back. The camera app is also largely unchanged, but on the G6 you get some cool new features, like this strip of thumbnails showing recently taken images. For the camera experts, there's also object tracking, autofocus and full manual controls while recording video. The G5 has manual controls for still photos only. Not surprisingly, images out of the LG G6 look pretty good, but to my eyes, I would say that the ones from the G5 look just as fine, if not better. In many of the photos that I took, I noticed that the G5 captures more details in its photos. The G6 only adds more sharpness in image processing, making them appear to be more detailed even when they're actually not. But perhaps the G6 performs slightly better in low light, and its colors tend to be a bit more vivid. About the wide-angle camera performance, images are of comparable quality, but you should be able to squeeze more detail out of the scene with the G6. Keep in mind that both wide-angle cameras lack optical stabilization and have smaller apertures, so they aren't ideal for low-light photos. When it comes to taking selfies, I would say that the G6 has the upper hand. Regular photos are of the same level of quality, but on the G6 there's a wide-angle lens mode, which comes in handy when you need to fit a lot of people in a single shot. Both phones take video at up to 4K resolution. The results are equally good, but the G6 produces colors that are slightly more vivid. Also, video taken with its wide-angle camera is of better quality, and unlike the G5, it doesn't twitch when changing between the regular and the wide-angle cameras. What also surprised me was that the G5 had a better loudspeaker. I mean, sure, they both get pretty loud without crackling at maximum volume, but the sound out of the G5 has more depth to it. Both phones have analog audio jacks in case you're wondering, but only the G5 has an infrared blaster, meaning that it can control a number of home appliances, like your TV or your air conditioner. About the batteries inside both phones, the LG G6 has the advantage thanks to its 18% bigger battery. This pre-production G6 unit that I've been testing lasts about a day and a half of normal use, which is better than the G5. Both phones support quick charging, meaning that they can be completely refilled in less than 90 minutes. But only the G5 has a removable battery, which can be replaced if you're into that kind of stuff. In conclusion, the LG G6 is the better phone overall. It is technically superior, visually attractive, and no less importantly, water-resistant. But it is also the more expensive option. Right now, a G5 costs less than $400, which makes it at least $250 cheaper than the G6. For that amount of cash, you get a well-performing, up-to-date smartphone with decent hardware specs and a very capable camera at the back. At the end of the day, the G6 is highly unlikely to leave you disappointed. But if your budget is tight, the G5 is a good alternative at a reasonable price.